move on to our second team. This is Decarbonizing Construction from the Ground Up. The team is from Uruguay and is made up of 3 Chevening alumni. The presenter today will be Agustín Dieste, and answering questions in the chat box will be Federico Vaz. So over to you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Agustín Dieste, and I represent Team Decarbonizing Construction from the Ground Up from Uruguay. Next slide, please. For this hackathon and within the mitigation goal, we identified the challenge of decarbonizing the construction sector. Construction and the running of the built environment account for 39% of carbon emissions globally. Therefore, policy innovations that contribute to decarbonizing these industries can significantly contribute to a concerted effort across industrial sectors. Countries like Uruguay, where traditional building methods are carbon intensive, have the opportunity to further develop a value chain of forestry products that supply the world with biological material alternatives that will store carbon away from the atmosphere within the built environment. However, whereas Uruguay's paper pulp industrial chain has been developing and is now in full operation and expansion, the sawn timber industry has seen a significantly slower development. Next slide, please. To address this challenge, we devised the Affordable Sustainable Housing Program, PAVS for its acronym in Spanish, a policy proposal that looks at incentivizing the demand and supply of housing solutions that make intensive use of construction materials and components based on sustainably managed sources. For this policy, Uruguay's government, who is typically a major actor in any substantial transformation, given the internal market size, will implement a carbon emission framework to evaluate new planning applications and grant progressive corporate income tax breaks to developers. In the same vein, it will set up assessment mechanisms for wood-intensive projects and fast-track their approval. To increase the demand, the government will also establish a set of financial products targeted to first-time homebuyers. On the one hand, a novel equity scheme will enable purchasers to buy specific new-build homes from registered home builders whose developments rank over a threshold in the carbon emission framework. The state will then buy a share between 30 and 70% of the new homes. So purchasers will pay a mortgage on the share they own and a below market value rent on the remainder to the National Mortgage Bank. On the other hand, the National Mortgage Bank will offer special savings accounts allowing prospective buyers to save towards their deposits by investing in the local forestry sector. Besides extending the state's stake in the initial stages of the value and supply chain of the local forestry industry, it will help absorb part of the fiscal waiver granted to developers through corporate income tax breaks. Next slide, please. We expect the policy impact to be manifold. In particular, we aim to first accelerate the transition of the construction industry to a material supply chain that favors carbon negative materials, thus cutting on an increasingly significant share of the 39% of carbon emissions associated to the built environment. Secondly, stimulating the forestry sector development via increased demand for its high added value products, of which currently nearly 50% of the solid wood exported from Uruguay leaves the country with little to no added value as roundwood. Thirdly, we aim at developing the creation of jobs by adding links in the value chain of biomaterials. And lastly, our policy will contribute to the provision of the 60 to 70,000 homes currently needed in Uruguay, whilst prioritizing first-time buyers who often struggle to raise capital for an upfront down payment. Next slide, please. We understand that it is an advantage that Uruguay is a country where clear rules and institutional stability, where many of the bureaucratic infrastructures to implement this program are already in place. That being said, to make this policy a reality, the government, working closely with existing state, private, and civil society stakeholders, will need to define and operationalize the Construction Carbon Emission Framework, CCEF.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. For this, a dedicated agency may need to be set up. Likewise, a process to assess and rate new planning applications in accordance with their embodied carbon credentials will need to be developed. A communication strategy will need to be set up to inform developers of the potential progressive benefits associated with obtaining high ratings in their planning applications against the Construction Carbon Emission Framework. Finally, the National Mortgage Bank and National Housing Agency, jointly with other public and private stakeholders, will need to further develop the financial instrument to launch the shared equity scheme and forestry saving accounts for first-time homebuyers. Correspondingly, a communications campaign will need to be set up to promote the benefits to the public. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions from the panel.
Thanks very much, Agustín. Another great presentation and fantastic timekeeping. So thanks very much. We have a question from Sasha. Over to you.
Thank you, the team. Thank you, Agustín, for your excellent presentation. I have a quick question. I'm well, just informed about the energy efficiency in houses, and I'm also the passive house energy consultant. So therefore, I clearly understand the point of reducing the carbon footprint of the construction materials and the construction of new houses. However, this is only some part of all of the total, just during the lifetime of a house. This is only, just not that significant part of the energy consumption of the house. So therefore, just my question is, I did not see the proposal of the minimum energy performance requirements for those houses, how energy efficient those houses proposed that to be built within the program should be. So, and maybe you can also answer, just in a way how your policy proposal targets the improvement of not during the construction or the improvement of energy efficiency of those project or the proposals, and the reduction not only the carbon footprint during the construction, but also during the exploitation of those buildings over the next 50 years, for example. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Very pertinent question. And the reason we may have omitted that, and it could be a good suggestion to implement further steps in ensuring in the lifespan of the buildings, the operational carbon is also kept to a minimum and reduced. However, we focused our attention in the embedded carbon because it's usually in many countries, and certainly in Uruguay, absent from the regulations, where operational carbon and already targets into improving the U value, for example, of the built envelope are already in place, and those could be made, of course, progressively tighter in the future, but there was currently no policy in place to reduce the embedded carbon, and this could help develop this forestry sector into planting more trees and further creating a virtuous circle of innovation there. So it will be a welcome addition to maybe ensure that these solutions that are built under the scheme are also very efficient, which is also easier to do in wood-intensive buildings, to have a highly insulated envelope, easier than with other construction methods that include more concrete or steel that have higher conductiveness of heat. So thermal loss is harder to control. So it can be done, and it will be a welcome addition to our policy proposal. Yes.
Thanks very much. And I think there are some questions coming in on the chat, so I look forward to seeing a bit more about your policy in depth. Thanks for a great presentation.